One of the most alarming, arguably the most alarming of Donald Trump's many alarming picks for his new administration is Kash Patel for FBI director. One of the reasons for that is just the unique history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a place that was in the hands of a paranoid, petty authoritarian figure for decades. J. Edgar Hoover, the man whose name still graces the headquarters of the FBI, led the Bureau until his death in 1972, and he used his position to persecute anyone on his enemies list.
Secret FBI memos made public today show that the late J. Edgar Hoover ordered a nationwide campaign to disrupt the activities of the New Left.
The documents prove for the first time that the FBI undertook a program in 1968 to harass and destroy New Left political organizations whose views the federal police agency disagreed with. Director Hoover detailed the setup of the program, saying anarchists and revolutionists had to be neutralized if law and order and a civilized society were to survive.
Just to be clear, these so-called anarchists and revolutionists who Hoover targeted included women's rights groups, civil rights activists, protesters against the Vietnam War, famously Martin Luther King Jr. Hoover's abuses of power were so bad, there was a concerted effort to try to essentially Hoover-proof the FBI. Once he died, one of the ways that was done was giving the FBI directors 10-year terms. Hoover had been there for basically half a century. Donald Trump already broke that norm when he fired FBI Director James Comey in his first term. It was a big scandal for a reason. And now he wants to do it again, firing the current FBI Director, Christopher Wray, who he himself appointed to install Kash Patel 3 years before the end of Wray's term. Kash Patel, a man who has already put together and published an enemies list. Tim Weiner is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of Enemies, A History of the FBI. James Risen, also a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, senior national security correspondent for The Intercept, and the author of The Last Honest Man, the CIA, the FBI, the Mafia, and the Kennedys, and One Senator's Fight to Save Democracy. They both join me now. I feel like I could talk to both of you for hours on this topic. You're an incredible repository of knowledge and expertise. Let me just start with, I'll start with you, James. How your knowledge of the history and the darkest chapters in the FBI inform how you think about this appointment of Patel and the railroading and sidestepping of one of the main sort of post-Hoover reforms, the 10-year term, to try to insulate it from the kind of personal grudges of the president.
Well, I think that there's one significant difference between J. Edgar Hoover and Kash Patel and Donald Trump. Hoover was always, he was a paranoid and delusional who was caught up in conspiracy theories about race primarily, but he was always using the FBI for his own personal power and for the power of the FBI. He saw the FBI as his own personal fiefdom, and he was not using the FBI at the behest of any particular president. Right. The difference now will be that Kash Patel wants to use the FBI at the behest of a president and as his tool. And that's a significant difference between what Hoover did. Hoover really was never in the pocket of any specific president. He had some close relationships with individual presidents, and he also had serious fallings out with presidents. Most famously, he sort of tried to blackmail John F. Kennedy. Yes. But it was always at, his goal was always the expansion of J. Edgar Hoover's power, right, not the power of a president. And I think that could be a major difference.
What do you think, Tim?
Hoover's enemies list was the left, essentially. Also journalists, people on the National Security Council who he thought were leakers. Donald Trump's enemies list and Kash Patel's enemies list is not the left, it's the center. On that list, and there is one, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, right, Chris Wray, the current director of the FBI, the former head of the CIA, John Brennan, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. These folks want to essentially prosecute people like Obama, Biden, for treason. Donald Trump wants them prosecuted for treason, an offense punishable by death.
One of the things that came through in the sort of post-Hoover era James, and you have a book about the Church Committee, which was just one of these moments of reckoning, of course, was just the rot that people were willing to do the things that Hoover had them do. I mean, if you're a bureau agent and you're sitting there putting together the letter to MLK with the gun to try to get him to shoot himself, right? I mean, it should be crossing your head that what I'm doing is flagrantly illegal and unconstitutional. Are you confident that the culture of the bureau has changed such that people there would not go for that kind of thing should Patel attempt, or anyone under Trump attempt, those kinds of abuses?
I think that's the $64 question. We don't know the answer to that. And I think one of the problems is in the first Trump administration, we talked all the time about can the government stop Trump? And I think after a second term, it's going to be much harder than it was in the first term. I think it's becoming much more difficult to find people who are willing to stand up to Trump and to this onslaught against regular order, against the rule of law, against democracy.
I'm curious because obviously one of the ways he manipulated the FBI was the incredible personal loyalty to him and his loyalty to the FBI, right? So it wasn't like he was declaring war on the FBI the way that Patel says. He wants to fire everyone who works at the headquarters. And I wonder, Tim, if you think that provides a bit of a check or will stymie the worst, most sort of authoritarian impulses.
Kash Patel will do anything Trump tells him to do. Patel has said on his first day he wants to essentially evacuate FBI headquarters, send everybody out to the 50 states, and turn the headquarters into a museum of the deep state. Trump is now empowered by the Supreme Court, which ruled in July that he cannot ever be prosecuted for crimes he commits as president. He can order Patel, for example, to use the FBI as an instrument of political warfare, just as Hoover did, to prosecute anyone he chooses and to spy on Americans without fear of running afoul of the Constitution or the law.
I mean, it would run afoul of the Constitution. The questions of accountability. I mean, it's important to me to sort of reiterate the fact that, like,
there is still a Constitution.
The Constitution does still exist, right? Yes, the Constitution does still exist, whether they want to ignore or not. James Rise and Tim Weiner, it's great to have you here. I want to play one last bit here of Senator Frank Church and his warning, because I think one of my contentions about our era, particularly as the memory of fascism has abated, people having to be reacquainted with the lessons from it. I think the lessons of this era, of the Hoover era, are also fading in memory. Here's what Frank Church had to say about the threat, essentially, of authoritarianism here in the U.S. Take a listen.
I don't want to see this country ever go across the bridge. I know the capacity that is there to make tyranny total in America. And we must see to it that this agency and all agencies that possess this technology operate within the law and under proper supervision so that we never cross over that abyss. That's the abyss from which there is no return.
Senator was talking to the CIA there, James, but I imagine that Frank Church, were he alive today, would have a lot of warnings for us.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that people keep calling for another Church committee. And I think we're going to need one in about 4 years.
Yeah, or sooner. Tim Weiner, James Risen. Thank you, gentlemen, both.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.